Welcome, everyone. This is Casey with Aligned Astrology. Happy to have you back. Today, we're talking about the deeper meaning of this Mercury retrograde. Now, this is the second Mercury retrograde of our year. This one is in Cancer. We had our first one in the sign of Pisces in February to mid to late March, and our last retrograde of this year will be in Scorpio in mid October through November. But today we're talking about this Mercury retrograde in the sign of Cancer. And this Mercury retrograde is ruled by the moon. And if you've watched my last video, you know that Mercury stationed to go retrograde during the full moon in Capricorn, right before culmination. So when we look at a Mercury retrograde or any other planet stationing retrograde for that matter, we want to look at the dispositor or the ruler of that retrograde planet. Me, as a traditional Hellenistic astrologer, like to look at it from this standpoint because we can then understand the deeper meaning of the retrograde. So, this Mercury retrograde is going to have a nice cycle through the sign of Cancer, stationed on July 29th at 26 degrees, and it is now moving backward in that sign. Now, as Mercury moves retrograde through Cancer, it's important for us to notice what the moon's doing as well. The moon just culminated in a full moon across from the sun in Cancer. So now the moon is waning. It is moving towards its home sign, Cancer, now. So the moon, we can see it as losing light, weakening, going more internal. So this goes hand in hand with our Mercury in retrograde in the sign of Cancer. When we think about Mercury, a very analytical planet, it is about communication and our outward expression when it comes to things like gambling, things like writing, and being a sort of public speaker. We start to notice that Mercury in the sign of Cancer doesn't have that. It is not in a dignified place for itself. It is in the sign of Cancer where it is considered to be peregrine, meaning it has no dignity, but it takes on the characteristics of Cancer. So, this retrograde period may be a time of rethinking, connecting with old friends, taking on the energy of Cancer. We may be wrapped around family. It may be a family dynamic that we're reviewing, but depending on our own rising sign, where this Cancer sign lies in our chart, can speak directly to that part of our life where this retrograde is occurring. And it's important for us to notice Mercury as a messenger of the gods. Mercury, Hermes, according to the Greek mythology, is the messenger of the gods who travels fast and speaks to each of these deities, gains the message, and then shares it. So when Mercury goes retrograde, which is multiple times a year, we notice that Mercury eventually comes into conjunction with the Sun. So let's just talk about the cazimi and combustion and under the rays of the Sun. Mercury enters into conjunction, we can say, with the Sun on July 12th. But prior to that, as it moves closer towards the Sun, it enters into what we call under the beams of the Sun, meaning it is burning up, it is weakened, even more debilitated in this place, it becomes challenged. So we can tend to not know what we're doing right now, not know what direction we're going in right now. Things may feel like they're not where we want them to be, and that's okay. It's all a part of the bigger plan. And as the moon, or not the moon, but as Mercury becomes conjunct to the Sun, it is combust 3 degrees before it is entering into combustion, meaning it is dying. It is becoming that evening star. It is learning the things that it needs to learn. It is coming into that final bout of its own experience before we consider it to lose its life, right? And then it is born again as it comes into conjunction with the sun, coming into that 1 degree mark along with the sun. And when the sun and Mercury come into conjunction under 17 minutes, it is considered to be Kazemi now. And Kazemi places Mercury into like the throne room of the sun. It's like in the king's throne room. Now you receive exaltation in a sense, high glory, and receive the message directly from the sun. So Mercury is now born again, becoming a morning star in this case. Newly born with new information, guidance, clarity, and understanding. And it can be from a very emotional place. It can be clarity around our family and the connections that we have, the relationships that we've mended over this retrograde period up to this point, which will be on July 12th. And as Mercury begins to separate from the sun, it now has that new information, but it's continuing to go retrograde for just a week and some change. And Mercury stations on July 23rd. When Mercury stations July 23rd, we know that Mercury is going to station direct at 16 degrees. So that's 16 degrees prior, or let's say 10 degrees earlier than its station retrograde. So now Mercury is in its shadow period and begins to move forward. And as Mercury moves forward, it's still in the sign of Cancer, still being ruled by the moon. So when we watch this period of Mercury retrograde stationing and moving forward, we want to notice how the moon is playing a part in this experience, what Mercury is expressing itself onto. And we're going to pull up a chart so we can look at these things in real time. It's always so interesting when we start to look at the astrology, and then we can see for ourselves how these retrograde periods play such a big part in our own personal lives, the things that we're getting ready to connect to, and the things that we're separated from, and the things that we're returning to in order to complete, revise, and revision. So on at the end of June, on June 29th, we had Mercury station retrograde, and we see it station retrograde right before coming into a conjunct aspect with Jupiter, which is very positive, right? As Jupiter is our greater benefic of astrology. As Mercury stationed retrograde and started to move backwards, we noticed that it also missed a sextile aspect to Mars, which just moved into Gemini at this point. Now, Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, and we know that on July 4th, America's birthday, we experience a we experience a Uranus Mars conjunction in the sign of Gemini. And if you know about these conjunctions, they can be challenging. They can call for great change. And it can be of great expansion, of very revolutionary action. Many different things can take place. But now that we have a retrograde Mercury, whatever goes on around this time period is going to shift the tides in a different direction. And as Mercury continues to retrograde, we want to watch as the moon continues to move forward. As we move into July 6th to July 7th, we notice that the moon crosses over Neptune, and then Neptune retrogrades. As the moon continues to wane closer and closer towards the sun, we talked about it a moment ago, as we enter into July 12th, the sun and Mercury conjoin one another. As the Mercury passes through the beams of the sun, it joins in Kazemi, being born again as the morning star. And we notice that as that occurs, the moon moves into the same sign as Mercury and the sun, preparing for that new moon in the sign of Cancer. So the moon has played such a part in this Mercury retrograde thus far, starting with the retrograde in the full moon. Mercury is co-present almost in a conjunct aspect with this new moon. We're just going to move the chart a couple hours forward so you can see directly that this new moon in Cancer state culminates at 21 degrees, and Mercury is within the 3-degree orb range to be present to that new moon. So it just goes to show us how prominent these Mercury retrogrades can be in the grand scheme of things. And as that Mercury continues to go retrograde, we notice that it's going to eventually station direct at 16 degrees on July 23rd. And as Mercury stations, we will move the chart a couple of days forward, and we can already see here, for example, that at 16 degrees of Cancer, Mercury is in a 3-degree orb range for a square with Saturn in Aries. So this Saturn is in a superior square aspect, expressing its energy towards Mercury. But if we just move the chart forward to July 26th, we see that Saturn stations to go retrograde. This is Saturn's only retrograde for the year, but that's another video. We're talking about Mercury as we move forward, as Mercury stations to go direct on July 23rd and continues to move forward. Mercury eventually leaves from its shadow. Moving into August 6th, we see that Mercury enters back into 26 degrees. And if we continue to move the chart forward, we'll see that Mercury will also be co-present along with the moon for the solar eclipse in Leo. So Mercury's had a journey starting with that retrograde just to end up co-present with Jupiter, which it almost came in contact with prior to going retrograde, as well as this solar eclipse in the sign of Leo. So this can be the build-up point to this moment of our experience. When Mercury stationed retrograde in the sign of Cancer, for each one of us, we can ask ourselves, what needed revising? What connections did I need to go back to? Who showed up in my life at this point in time? When we think about Mercury in the sign of Cancer, taking on the characteristics of Cancer, our emotions, our memories, returning back to the things that give us the emotional security, that does not necessarily allow Mercury to think and move forward in that direction of intellect, but more so in the direction of emotional security. Being mindful of the moon and its support in this case. Just one more thing to speak about, since we're talking about the retrograde cycles of Mercury. In that last retrograde cycle, when Mercury was retrograde in the sign of Pisces, Jupiter was the ruler, and Jupiter was also in the sign of Cancer in its exaltation place. And now we know that Jupiter has moved on to the sign of Leo, but we can take a moment and reflect here. We can see, we can recall what we were doing in February through March, when Jupiter was in Pisces, or Jupiter was in Cancer and Mercury was in Pisces. So as we begin to formulate these own experiences for ourselves, we can see in real time how these moments can show up. We're going to take a few moments and go over some horoscopes quickly. I'm going to bring it back to today. And we're going to look at Aries rising to begin. So we're just going to adjust the chart. So for our good old Aries rising friends, and remember friends, as I am a traditional astrologer, I always go by the rising sign in order to determine how this lands for you, because at our time of birth, our rising sign determined where all our planets landed. But if you like to listen to your sun or your moon or anything else, you can listen to all of it. Listen to all of it and see how it shows up for you. This is a form of divination that can be expressed and learned and taught in many different ways. So see what you gain from it. But for Aries rising friends, you are experiencing this Mercury retrograde in the fourth house of home, family, foundation, our upbringing, our childhood. Mercury retrograding here is a time of revisiting those old ways of being, the connection with our families, connection with our parents. And as we move through this retrograde, we know that what happens at home also supports and affects what happens out in the public life. So take an understanding that Mercury retrograde, as the moon wanes back towards Cancer, as we go into our internal place as Aries risings, understand that it's time for rest. It's time to slow down, to notice what needs to change. For Taurus risings, we're experiencing Mercury retrograde in the third house. And a retrograde Mercury does not allow us to always communicate properly. It calls for us to express ourselves time and time again, to articulate ourselves, to share the things that we want to share on numerous occasions. Being that this is the third house of day-to-day travel or the third house of communication and expression, this can show that whatever we're working on, whatever things that we want to share, it's time to bring them to the revision table. It's time to go over them again. And as we move through these things, as we understand what needs to be done, we can then move forward. And we can notice how this retrograde cycle shows up for us at the end as we station direct and we move towards that fourth house lunar eclipse. But notice what comes for you around July 12th. What clarity comes. Maybe it's that eureka moment. You know how to finish the book or whatever else we're working on. Notice how that comes up, Taurus. And Gemini rising, you experience this retrograde in the second house. Now, a lot of the times we look at the second house and we think finances immediately, but we can also think about our skills and our abilities. Being that Mercury is ruling over our first house, we'll have this Uranus and Mars conjunction in our first house. So it can call for a dynamic change based off of our own abilities, and that Mars in rulership over our sixth house of health. There can be a lot of things going on with our physical body, our physical well-being, an opportunity for us to learn something new and apply some skills that we've learned in order to benefit ourselves in a positive way. Mercury retrograde in the second house helps us go back to the drawing board, helps us to revise our own abilities and notice what works best in our experience in supporting our own selves. And we can notice that when we support ourselves properly, we have more room. Our cup is full in order to support and fill the cups of the others around us. Cancer rising, you have this Mercury retrograde in the first house. It can be a re-envisioning of our own mind, our own thoughts, how we think, how we express ourselves and communicate with the people around us. Since this Mercury retrograde occurred right before the culmination of the full moon in Capricorn, this can be closely directed to our one-on-one relationships. Understanding that our partner may not always see eye to eye with us, and this gives us an opportunity to learn what it means to articulate ourselves in a more understandable way for the people around us, for our partners, and our other connections. This Mercury retrograde is a time of going inward for Cancers. And since we have the Mars-Uranus conjunction in the 12th house, it can show that a big internal shift is here to change us for the better, hopefully. Leo risings have this retrograde Mercury in the 12th house, and placing this retrograde in the 12th house makes it sort of difficult to see. When we have a retrograde planet, we go internal, we go inside. But when we think about the 12th house, it's already a place of the subconscious mind. Maybe we begin to experience what we're looking for in dreams, in meditation, in our space of solitude. Having this place of solitude allows for us to see ourselves, to see our minds, to feel our emotions, and to understand the difference. This connection that we have with our internal world is allowing us to be able to share and express ourselves in a brand new way, in more of a sudden and revolutionary way, if we want to consider the conjunction in the 11th house. This will allow us to be seen in our communities in a different way for Leo rising. Now, Virgo risings, you experience this retrograde Mercury in the 11th house of community, possibly transforming our community, changing our community, or becoming a part of a new community. This can be closely tied into our work life, as this culmination of the Uranus and Mars conjunction will be in the 10th house, where Mercury will have rulership over, as well as our first house of self and expression. Since we are going back to the drawing board around our self-expression, around our career, it can only mean that we're sharing ourselves differently in communication with a community of people that we're acquainted with. It can be our family in a case. So we need to understand what's going on right now. What are we going over again? What can't we move past? What must be corrected or transformed, changed, benefited right now before we can move forward towards those career benefits, towards the self understanding. Next, Libra rising, you experience this retrograde in the 10th house of career, of public role, the people that we work with, the family dynamic that we have, everything that wants to show itself here and now in regards to our emotional well-being, in regards to how we connect with people on the emotional level, in regards to our public role. Like, how do we connect with our own personal selves in this way? How are we seen right now? As Mercury retrogrades through our 10th house, we begin to rebuild ourselves, rebuild our public voice, and begin to share ourselves from a more emotional, deep-rooted level, a more beneficial level. And as Mercury joins the Sun in a Cazimi on the 12th of July, maybe we gain that clarity. This is how I want to represent myself. This is how I want to share and be seen for Libra rising. Now, for Scorpio rising, we're experiencing this Mercury retrograde in the 9th house. And Mercury retrograde in the 9th house is connecting us back to our teachings, our understandings around things. Maybe it's around the astrology, maybe it's around our own philosophy of life, or the religion, the spiritual practices that we've been closely connected to. We're going back to the drawing board. Things are coming up to surface from our memories so we can apply these things again in order to reconnect. And this can call for us to let go of some different things in our lives as we connect more deeply into our own forms of spirituality, maybe release old karma or old relationships that no longer serve us. As this Mercury joins the Cazimi, maybe we come into something completely new that we want to proceed towards. Maybe we leave something else behind in the transition phase. And notice in our own experience, Scorpio rising, that there's no rush, friends. It's just an opportunity to see what's next right now. Sagittarius, you experience this retrograde Mercury in the 8th house of the esteem of others, other people's money. This can be correlated to our family karma dynamic. Maybe it's time to set boundaries in a different way, or even remove ourselves altogether from particular relationships. As Mercury moves through this retrograde and we find more and more clarity over these next couple of weeks around these different things, maybe it feels like more and more fog for some of us. Maybe it feels like more lack of understanding at first, but sometimes we have to fall down to the bottom of the mountain to look up and see the peaks, to look over and see the horizon. And we can begin to find more clarity as this July 12th Kazemi arrives for us. And eventually, as we move towards that lunar, or the solar eclipse that will be coming up on August 12th in the sign of Leo, maybe whatever we let go of here over these next couple of weeks makes room for what we receive from that eclipse. And it's important for us to notice that when we talk about eclipses, which we're going to talk about in a different video, these solar eclipses are times of new beginning, plantings of seeds that last for a year and a half. That 6-month period of that eclipse processes, and we begin to understand what was planted, what we learned. But remember, friends, it all starts with letting something go. Capricorn rising, you have this Mercury retrograde in the 7th house. Mercury in the 7th house in the sign of Cancer, closely correlated with our partnerships or the people that we connect with. A lot of the times when Mercury is retrograde in the 7th house, we go back to how we are sharing ourselves. Are we being received? Are we being understood properly? When we have it in the sign of Cancer, is it our emotional needs? Are our emotional needs being met? Have we been over this before? And maybe so. It's a retrograde. These are bringing unfinished things up to surface. We're taking care of all the unfinished business. We're tying up any loose ends. Wherever the case may lie, this is an opportunity to let things go. In traditional astrology, the 7th house is a place of endings. So we're going back and we're completing, we're finishing things for Capricorn rising. Aquarius rising, this retrograde is in the 6th house of service, of work, of the health of our physical bodies. When we think about Mercury, we think about the mind. It can be correlated to our emotional, our intellectual health and well-being, and how these things go hand in hand. Maybe there's something that we're seeking right now, something we want to correct, something we want to heal within ourselves, within our lives and our experiences. And maybe it leads us to new endeavors. As Mercury retrogrades and comes into that Kazemi, maybe we find that eureka moment, we find that clarity moment. And remember, our day-to-day experiences will begin to change, begin to transform and slow down, as right after this Mercury stations direct, we're going to have those planets in the 3rd house, both Neptune and Saturn retrograding. So our day is going to slow down. It's going to be a time to rethink these different things of our lives. Lastly, Pisces risings, you have this retrograde in the 5th house in Cancer. And Mercury retrograde in the 5th house can be wrapped around our family, our children, our relationships, the romance in our life. And it can be wrapped around how our emotional needs are being met, if they are being met, or if they need to be met. We can begin to communicate ourselves more clearly here. This is what this learning process is for. And maybe we gain that clarity around the 12th as the Kazemi presents itself to us. Maybe we understand how we need to share and express ourselves in our relationships, in our home, with our families, with the people around us. This is the time, Pisces rising. We've had that first Mercury retrograde cycle in the 1st house. For you, this is the 2nd one in the 5th house. So notice where we need to begin again. And that, friends, concludes our horoscopes and an understanding of what the deeper meaning of Mercury retrograde in the sign of Cancer can be around this time. If you like this kind of content, friends, please remember to like this video and subscribe. It helps the algorithm so that other people like you have an opportunity to see this video. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. This is Casey with Aligned Astrology. Until the next time.